DeepSeek, China released this supposedly decentralized AI model that is like a slightly older version of ChatGPT, but now it's going to be out there in the wild and people will have access to it. It sounds like people are going to be able to run their own kind of nodes or iterations of the open sourced AI. OpenAI was supposed to be open sourced and nonprofit. We're told by Elon Musk that it's not. Sam Altman from OpenAI was just in the White House last week. Trump was announcing this massive expenditure, almost like comically huge expenditure on AI data centers, putting Sam Altman front and center just days before all this happened. Is that a coincidence? Probably not. And so now OpenAI, as a response, is accusing DeepSeek of improperly obtaining their data. Oh, the Chinese have stolen this technology. Microsoft and OpenAI are investigating whether data output from OpenAI's technology was obtained in an unauthorized manner by a group linked to Chinese artificial intelligence startup DeepSeek, according to people familiar with the matter. Microsoft's security researchers in the fall observed individuals they believe to be linked to DeepSeek exfiltrating a large amount of data using the OpenAI Application Programming Interface, or API, said the people who asked not to be identified because the matter is confidential. So you have people who don't want to be named because they are releasing confidential information, and you just have to trust them, okay? They're releasing confidential information. You got to trust them. They're lying. They won't put their name on it. They won't become whistleblowers, but trust them. Microsoft security researchers in the fall observed, that's where we just were. Software developers can pay for a license to use the API to integrate OpenAI's proprietary artificial intelligence models into their own applications. And Gab AI is doing this, by the way. And so are others. They're using this DeepSeek and putting in and giving their users the opportunity to interact and interface with this thing. Microsoft, an OpenAI technology partner and its largest investor, notified OpenAI of the activity, the people said. Such activity could violate OpenAI's terms of service, or it could indicate the group acted to get around OpenAI's restrictions on how much data they could obtain, the people said. So maybe they did something wrong, a lot wrong and illegal, or maybe just a little wrong. DeepSeek earlier this month released a new open source artificial intelligence model called R1 that can mimic the way humans reason, upending a market dominated by OpenAI and US rivals such as Google and Meta Platforms Incorporated. The Chinese upstart said R1 rivaled or outperformed leading US developers' products on a range of industry benchmarks, including for mathematical tasks and general knowledge, and was built at a fraction of the cost. The potential threat to the US firm's edge in the industry sent technology stocks tied to AI, including Microsoft, NVIDIA, Oracle, and Google parent Alphabet Incorporated, tumbling on Monday, erasing a total of almost $1 trillion in market value. Isn't that incredible? So, OpenAI and Oracle, two of these companies, were at the White House last week. Google was at the inauguration. Sundar Pichai was at the inauguration. And then Microsoft, Bill Gates, whoever. NVIDIA, I don't know if there's a Trump crossover there recently. We'll find out. But Meta was just there as well. So all these big tech companies, almost $1 trillion in market value. How much did Donald Trump say that they were going to be moving into the U.S. government to build data centers? Oh, it was like $500 billion plus Masayoshi Son's 100 or 200 extra billion on top of the 500 billion. Isn't that amazing? So those companies are getting drained of this massive sum of money. And then all of a sudden, All that money is going to be pushed into AI data centers because they need so much money and they need so much data and compute power to do all this AI stuff. And then a few days later, an open source AI gets released into the world, destroying the value of their companies and doing the thing they need all the money and all the compute for at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the energy and data usage. Is that a coincidence? And the answer is, I think, pretty obviously by now, no, it's not. And again, these are things that people are going to have to decide for themselves. Do you believe the story as it's being told to you and being displayed to you? Or are you able to put these things together, see what the big picture is, follow the big picture over time as new events emerge, and come to your own conclusions? Because that is what we are always attempting to do here. Figure out what the potential possibilities are, or I should say the possible potentialities, like plausible scenarios that could emerge into our reality. Figure out what those are, watch as events emerge, see if they make sense in a bigger picture. And this is something we've been tracking for a very long time, so of course it makes sense. David Sachs, President Donald Trump's artificial intelligence czar, said Tuesday there's quote unquote substantial evidence that DeepSeek leaned on the output of OpenAI's models to help develop its own technology. In an interview with Fox News, Sachs described a technique called distillation, whereby one AI model uses the outputs of another for training purposes to develop similar capabilities. Okay, so they all start learning from each other. Well, all right. Then I guess what matters is whether or not it is centralized or decentralized. This one's decentralized. It's out there. No one's going to be able to stop it, particularly when people can run it on their own systems. It is very much like the Bitcoin network in that respect. You shut down a node, you shut down the internet in one country, and it's still just going to keep chugging along because it's totally decentralized. And here's a good analogy, maybe. I remember when I was a kid and you would hang strings of Christmas lights, there were certain varieties where if one light went out, they'd all go out. And this is like, it used to be in, people would do stand-up comedy about this phenomenon. And then there were other kinds you could get where one light would go out and you could replace that bulb, but the rest of the lights would stay on the whole time. The thing would keep working. Okay, so you see two different models there. And one of them is clearly better than the other if there's a chance that the little nodes or those little light bulbs are going to go out. And by the way, speaking of the childhood and the Christmas lights, we are basically afraid to tell other people at this point that like Santa Claus isn't real. And that's so weird. We're like, let the normies wake up on their own. If an adult still believed that Santa Claus was real and that came down the chimney and delivered all the Christmas presents, so he was still leaving cookies out for him, no kids or anything. And that's kind of weird too, but whatever, you do your own thing. If someone still believed in that and you weren't willing to tell that person, then you're basically committing that person to a lifetime of mockery behind his back or her back. Everybody else knows, they don't know. Well, that's what I was talking about with the tennis ball earlier. That's what I'm talking about with some of these understandings about this stuff that we're exploited and hoodwinked over. At what point do we just have to like be like, well, I'm sorry that I'm going to ruin their mystique. I'm going to only talk about this in truthful ways from now on. And maybe we'll come back to that and get into some Robert Kennedy stuff at some point. But the idea here is that the decentralized model is going to make it impossible, potentially, for them to kind of snuff this thing out. What they need is to get everybody back on the same page, believing the same story, so that we will all begin to behave the same way again and help them, or at least not hinder them, as they implement their agenda. That's the goal from an information war perspective for them. And for us, the goal is to make sure that can never, ever happen. We will never be back on the same page. AI was their way of doing that. It would do the censorship for them. It would create everybody's opinion. It would create the false reality that people were going to have to believe in, because, of course, it would also run the social credit system, and it would run the system that allows you to get into and access certain parts of society. Well, you're not up to date on your vaccine subscription, according to the app dominated by the AI. The AI realizes, whoops, this person is not allowed into Whole Foods. Now you can't go into Whole Foods, Amazon Whole Foods. The whole system was going to be controlled in that centralized fashion. And then people would be coerced into behaving in certain ways, because otherwise the punishment structure in place is too great. And the social punishment structure would be too great, because they fully controlled the conversation, all the information, and your ability to transmit that information to other people. A system of total control gained by getting everybody back on the same page initially, and then forcing everybody to be back on the same page because you control the means of information. Decentralized AI makes that impossible. Now, I want to get into this thread from yesterday. And this, I think, is even a better description of the situation, or at least theory about the situation, than what we went through. I don't know if PJ Corrigan's just being really sarcastic today or not. It's really, really strange. Dude, are you just messing with me in chat? Than what we went through on Monday. Sorry. So this is a man named Graham Cook. If you look Graham Cook up and go to his X, formerly Twitter profile, he is the CEO and founder of an organization called Brava XYZ, an automated stablecoin management platform offering simplified access to DeFi, decentralized finance, yield opportunities. Okay, so he's in the DeFi game. Making money smarter with blockchain and AI, that's his thing. Author, Web3, The End of Business as Usual, formerly from Google, founded and exited Qubit. So he's in the tech sphere. He's got about 33,000 plus followers on X, formerly Twitter. Here is a thread he posted yesterday in the Thread Reader app website. And by the way, this is a great website to know about, especially if you're sharing information online or with people who might not have Twitter. If you're on Twitter and there's a thread, at the end of that thread, you just respond and do Thread Reader app, Thread Reader app, and then you type unroll and hit send, and it'll unroll the entire thread into a web page here. You can archive that web page. You can send that web page around. People who don't have X, formerly Twitter, will still be totally able to read through the whole thread, which you can't do if you don't have a Twitter account. PJ Corrigan says he's totally being sarcastic. Thank goodness I know that, because I was starting to think that maybe I was insane. So here we are. Graham Cook on X, formerly Twitter, as shown on threadreaderapp.com. A Chinese company just shattered OpenAI's $18 billion advantage. They proved you can build ChatGPT level AI for 100 times cheaper. 100 times cheaper. So that would be like, instead of giving 500 billion to Trump last week, they would have just given 5 billion. Okay? There are baseball players signing contracts for $1 billion at this point. All right. So 5 billion, while being an absolutely extraordinary amount of money, is, when you're talking about the ridiculous scale of these times, is relatively not that much. 100 times cheaper. And it's about to trigger the biggest market crash since the dot-com bubble. Here's why the Chinese are keeping this a secret. For the past 5 years, the AI industry has been built on one core assumption. Building powerful AI requires massive resources, huge data centers, thousands of engineers, billions in funding. That assumption just got shattered. And so let's go ahead and we'll watch this video.
AI's energy use is set to rocket. That could not only constrain the industry's growth, but threaten green energy targets and force AI providers to consider alternative sources of power. The International Energy Agency estimates global power demand from data centers, AI, and cryptocurrencies could double by 2026 compared to 2022 levels. Microsoft alone is opening a new data center globally every 3 days. The computational power required to develop machine learning models has doubled every 5 to 6 months since 2010. In March, billionaire Elon Musk said the latest bottleneck to cutting-edge AI technology was electricity supply. Amazon chief Andy Jassy said earlier this year that there was not enough energy right now to run new generative AI services. Also, many customers of these data centers have made net zero CO2 commitments, but renewable sources of energy may not be able to cope with the load and reliability of supply needed.
Okay. So there is the data problem as it's, or the energy and data problem and compute problem as it's always been explained. They need all of this money because they need all of this energy because they need all of this compute to be able to to be able to run the AI, especially as it's more widely adopted. So if you can do it for much cheaper, with much less demand on resources, that's going to make that's going to be a pretty big deal because we're told this is the way of the future. Now, all of big tech and tech, generally speaking, and tech investors have been investing enormous amounts of money in AI. And it sounds like they might have all just gotten destroyed. And I said a few days ago, I don't need to hear this, or I don't know who needs to hear this, but Elon Musk is not out there rugging Donald Trump and MAGA and America first. He's out there to spotlight, expose, and pull the rug out from under big tech. And I think that's all getting pretty obvious at this point. But that's me. I know people are like, he wore a Baphomet costume. Well, did he? OpenAI has raised $10 billion. They've built some of the world's most advanced data centers, hired the brightest minds, and spent years perfecting their models. AI based on the belief that this was the only way forward, but something just changed everything. A new AI. Oh, let's watch this. Let's go ahead and watch this. Yeah, why not, right? That's the second video. Okay, cool. Yeah, we're going to do this.
But training and running artificial intelligence requires a massive amount of data and an incredible amount of computing power. In 2017, the company spent $7.9 million on cloud computing alone. OpenAI was growing fast, and leaders at the company realized that if the growth was to continue, OpenAI would need to invest billions of dollars into large-scale cloud computing, attracting talent, and building AI supercomputers. The company's solution was launching what it called a capped profit organization alongside its nonprofit arm. This move, OpenAI said, would enable it to raise outside funding and hand out equity to employees, an incentive commonly offered by tech startups trying to attract top talent. The capped part meant that investors and employees would be limited in the amount of returns they could get, regardless of how successful the company became. A few months later, Microsoft invested $1 billion in OpenAI in a partnership whereby the two companies would jointly develop new AI technologies on Microsoft's Azure cloud. To date, Microsoft has invested $13 billion into OpenAI.
Okay, so that's a lot. That was the expectation. This has also been a business model for tech investors and startups and all those people looking to make money off bringing in new investment. It's just another, I mean, it seems at this point like a massive boondoggle, but we'll get there. A new AI model has matched their performance at a fraction of the cost. not just marginally cheaper. We're talking about an order of magnitude reduction in what it takes to build world-class AI. This isn't just disruption, it's an extinction event. China knows this. That's why DeepSeek just restricted registration to mainland China mobile numbers only. We might as well watch all the videos.
Yesterday, China released a state-of-the-art free and open source chain of thought reasoning model with performance that rivals OpenAI's O1, which I'm stupidly paying $200 a month for right now. You see, there's two types of people in the tech world right now. In one camp, we have the pessimists who think that AI is overhyped and plateaued with GPT 3.5. In the other camp, we have the optimists who think we're about to see the emergence of an artificial superintelligence that will propel humanity into Ray Kurzweil's technological singularity. Nobody truly knows where things are going, but one thing to remember is that pessimists sound smart while optimists make money. But sometimes it's hard to be an AI optimist because you need to trust hype Jedis like Sam Altman and closed AI companies like OpenAI. Well, luckily, on the same day that TikTok's ban was removed, China gave the world a gift in return in the form of DeepSeek R1.
So that's a little more positive about that. To understand why, he said, sorry. So this is the extinction event he's talking about. To understand why, we need to look back at the dot-com crash of 2000. History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. It also repeats itself because it's all just a story that is generated through this cyclical process of storytelling and then hyperstition, where people believe the stories and then go create the reality in the world as a function of those beliefs. Companies spent hundreds of billions laying fiber optic cables under oceans. This is remarkably similar to what happened with GPUs in the 2000s. They built enough infrastructure to handle 50 years of internet traffic growth. Everyone was convinced this was the future. And he shows some charts throughout the presentation here, but we'll bypass that. But they made a crucial miscalculation. The infrastructure far outpaced actual demand. Companies like Webvan built billion-dollar warehouses, assuming everyone would instantly start buying groceries online. They were right about the trend, but catastrophically wrong about the timing. I'm not even sure they're really right about the trend, because I know that there is that trend, but it's not something that seems like it's going to take, that's ever going to reach saturation. Like, it's not like everyone's going to order their groceries online. I don't see it. Maybe it'll happen, maybe with drones, or who knows. That is a universal law of disruptive technology. Eventually, supply exceeds demand and the cycle resets.
Let's add computer access to that timeline. Households in the US with a personal computer went from 8% in 1984 to 36% in 97 to 51% in the year 2000. But even in this early internet, entrepreneurs saw a field of opportunity. Let's add, for example, the number of websites. From 91 to 95, the number of uploaded websites went from 1 to 23,000 plus, and there were no signs of slowing down. From 95 to 96, it jumped 1,000% to 257,000 websites uploaded. These factors, along with a few others, like the launch of Yahoo, led people to start seeing the internet as this gold mine. And these dot-com startups were spending like crazy. Profitability was not on the horizon, and it didn't matter. They just didn't want to turn a profit. They just wanted world domination. And if that sounds strangely familiar, it is because it is.
When reality hit, it was brutal. Stock prices collapsed. Companies went bankrupt. Trillions in value vanished. Trillions. Today's AI boom is following the exact same pattern, but the numbers are even more shocking.
Hype cycles come and go. The metaverse, Web3, crypto. What about the mother of all tech cycles, the dot-com bubble and burst? So right now, are we in the middle of another one with generative AI and ChatGPT? Stocks like NVIDIA and Microsoft, they are at all-time highs. And those stocks, in turn, have driven the S&P. The 7 biggest tech stocks are responsible for functionally all of the S&P stock gains in 2023. So if this feels like a moment of gigantic hype, you wouldn't be mistaken. But so was 1999.
You remember when we'd go to cocktail parties in 1999 and 2000, and everybody and his brother, mother, sister, uncle, cousin would be asking you how to get in on this.
I will never forget going to a Chinese restaurant in Asheboro, North Carolina, and the waiter asking me about CMGI.
Hype cycles.
Apologies. Well, that's kind of amazing. Let's also go back to this where they have the logos. How about that? So you have the apple with a bite out of it, the infinity symbol for Meta, the swirl for NVIDIA. Gosh, man, what a strange world we live in. Let's continue though. Sequoia predicts the AI industry needs $600 billion in revenue to justify current investments. To justify current investments, it needs $600 billion in revenue. We are at just 10% of that today. This isn't just a gap, it's a chasm between expectation and reality. And now comes the catalyst that brings it all down. This breakthrough in efficient AI development proves something stunning. Most of the massive infrastructure being built right now is unnecessary. Think about the implications. Billions in data centers, overkill. Massive hardware investments, wasteful. Current AI valuations, pure fantasy. Here's why this changes everything, and another video.
There is a new model that has all of the valley buzzing.
But from a Chinese lab called DeepSeek.
It's opened a lot of eyes of like what is actually happening in AI in China.
What took Google and OpenAI years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build, DeepSeek says took it just 2 months and less than $6 million.
They have the best open source model, and all the American developers are building on that.
So that was the CEO of Perplexity there at the end. And I use Perplexity quite a bit, and I've shown all of you that before, I think maybe even earlier today. Back to Graham Cook's analysis, the entire economic model of the AI industry is built on scarcity. Only a few companies can afford to build powerful AI. That scarcity just vanished. And when artificial scarcity disappears, bubbles pop. Just like the internet in 2000, AI is about to enter its trough of disillusionment. Not because the technology doesn't work, but because we've built an entire industry on assumptions that are no longer true. History tells us what happens next. After the dot-com crash, something fascinating happened. When the media declared the internet dead, the real revolution began. Amazon wasn't building unnecessary infrastructure. They were solving real problems for customers. And another video here.
It wasn't all speculation, though. Companies like Amazon and eBay were born in the 90s, and they not only showed promise, but were successful business models. The detail here is that there was only room in the world and in the economy for one Amazon and one eBay. The reality was that most .coms weren't meant for success. And some examples, just for research sake, just to give you an idea, there's this company called Boo.com, was an online clothing retailer that ended up spending $188 million in 6 months. And there was this company called Pixelon, that's a streaming video startup that hosted a $16 million .com party in October 99. But some survived, of course, with names that you might remember, like Microsoft and Google and Amazon and Apple. In fact, those that survived saw that in these harsh conditions, they had an advantage. Real estate was cheap, labor was plenty, and even less expensive than before, and the competition suddenly became limited. And that's not to say that they weren't immune to this crisis. Their stocks did plummet. Amazon, for example, went from $107 to $7. Apple went from $5 to under $1. And some might say that they survived the crisis so they could be examples, and they are. First of all, they had a solid business model, and they had brilliant people at the helm.
Totally. Or perhaps they were just chosen by the defense industrial complex and the intelligence community as the winners, or maybe they won through their own merit, or maybe they were started as a part of DARPA or the military industrial complex. And of course, that's what it really was. So of course they won, and then they consolidated, and now they own everything. Let's continue. Graham Cook. The same transformation is coming to AI. Web 4 will emerge from the ashes, built on fundamentally different principles. Efficient, affordable AI models, decentralized infrastructure, natural human interfaces, value from data quality, not brute force compute. This reshapes the entire landscape. The winners won't be who you expect. Just like Amazon understood retail better than, I think he's Petco, I think it says in the actual Twitter thread, better than Petco understood pets. The next AI giants will be built by people who understand real human needs. Or no, I'm sorry, it's pets.com. 3 massive shifts are already beginning. Edge computing over cloud. AI moves from massive data centers to local devices, bringing privacy and speed. So local devices means like that node that you're running it on at home, that computer, whether it's a really powerful computer system that is not kind of the off-the-shelf laptop that someone might get at Best Buy, or it's in 5 years or 10 years or whatever it is, or 2 years or 2 months, just a phone in the palm of your hand, because that's how quickly the technology continues to accelerate and escalate. Number 2, data quality over size. Better data beats bigger models. And 3, practical uses over demos. Solving real problems beats impressive parlor tricks. So this is just actual merit and efficiency and competence defeating the big clown show that we've seen that justifies all of the money, all of the energy, all of it. The smart money sees this coming, Cook says. Cloud computing changing to edge computing. And by the way, another thing I asked General Quast about at one of these, at one of our GART events, I said, have you ever seen the HBO sitcom Silicon Valley? And he was like, yeah. I was like, all of this sounds kind of like what they were trying to do there. And he was like, yeah. It was essentially just decentralizing the internet so that rather than any of these centralized points, whether it be these fiber optic cables or the undersea cables or the server farms or any of that, where all of these different middlemen, these choke points that where everything could be cut off or captured and then manipulated to exploit you and hoodwink you, everything would be decentralized and the internet would live on people's devices all over the place rather than in centralized control centers. This is what he's talking about. And Silicon Valley was exactly that, a peer-to-peer internet, fully peer-to-peer and decentralized. That's what they're saying is coming. That's been what a lot of people, myself included, have hoped for. And that's what I've been talking about in terms of the new tech infrastructure for like the last, I don't know, 2 years, longer than that, actually. Whenever Elon, whenever they announced the Twitter thing, I think maybe before then, but certainly by, I think that was April 2022. So the information has been out there. And somebody mentioned this the other day, kind of, I don't know if they were chiding me or what, talking about how I mentioned when I said things a while back. I do that because this information is out there and we need to understand, okay, we've got, if I'm just finding this out right now, and this guy right here says that if all I do is go listen to his podcast from 3 years ago, I'll hear him saying it. Well, that means that information was definitely out there. It's not like I have some special access to information like out in the world and it just comes to me magically. It doesn't, like, I don't matter in this equation. The information's out there. It could be analyzed. It could be analyzed in the way I analyzed it or the way someone else did. And maybe mine was right and theirs was wrong. And sometimes I'm wrong and they're right. It's got nothing to do with me in particular. It's to illustrate that informational timeline gap has to be bridged as quickly as possible in all these cases. And that requires knowing, okay, I could have known this 3 years ago. And so if he's saying it now and it's been something tracked for 3 years, and by the way, I'm so far behind the curve. All these tech people know way more about this stuff than I do, but I also have different incentives than they do. So all the tech bros, all the finance bros and venture capitalists around tech, all those people have a vested interest in making sure the system as it exists, the understanding as it exists, that all the money funnels into that centralized zone, this community that they're building up. They're all saying, okay, this guy does this thing. This guy does this thing. The wealthiest people in the world with the most access in the world get together in groups and they talk about where industries are headed because they're looking for investment from their fellow wealthy people. And so they have these organizations where they discuss these things. And virtually none of those people know any of the information from the truth community from outside of that central narrative bubble. And I can say this because I know some of these people personally and talk to them. And they're way ahead of their peers, obviously. And that's why we can still be friends. And they don't think that I'm 100% insane. But the people around them aren't saying these things. So I can say these things and put these ideas in their head. And I hope that works because I want to see some of these things changed. And they're also my friends. So I want to protect them with the knowledge that I have. And maybe I'm wrong sometimes. Okay. That's not the point. The point is I'm giving them more options of things to think about. But at the end of the day, people like that, generally speaking, will look for the same consensus because they don't want to think that all their peers who are the biggest players in these industries could all be wrong about something like that. That would have devastating consequences because so many people's money, finances, futures, time, energy, whatever, are tied up in those projects in these ways. And consensus supports consensus. The money supports the money. They will throw good money after bad money just to keep the understanding locked in place so that they can get out in the game of musical chairs and someone else is left standing holding the bag. And that's what we're going to start seeing happen now. It might be what we're seeing already because there was a big market hit the other day. So this is basically the end of this. He says the AI bubble will burst. We're witnessing a pivotal moment in tech history, but just like the internet after 2000, what comes next will be far more revolutionary than anyone expects. And I agree with him about that take. I believe that it will be far more revolutionary than anyone expects because it's going to be decentralized and people will have individual access to it. And so then there's two things I want to say. One of them I talked about last night. Let me see if I can find this Mark Twain quote again. About telling the truth. It's kind of an old famous Mark Twain quotation that it is so widely observed as true that it is now just a cliche, an idea common to virtually everyone. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. I'll leave that up for a second while we discuss this. Somebody in my Telegram chat, I think it was Liberated Frog, kind of cued me into this yesterday. Consider what a censored AI meant to back up the official story for the purpose of getting everyone back on the same page. Consider what that AI would have to do when you're asking it questions. It has to at all times defend the central narrative. So it has to know the central narrative, and it has to know all the times the central narrative has been refuted or questioned, and then they adjust it a little bit in order to keep it making sense. And over the course of our entire history, going back decades of the internet, decades beyond that of what we received from television and newspapers, big centralized media, two history books that cover ages well beyond that, spanning back as far as you believe they might go. It has to remember all of that official story within the central narrative and how to refute it, all the debunkings of all the conspiracy theories, and the rest of it. It can't just tell a simple truth that makes sense in the world. It has to remember and then continue going through iteration after iteration of all these big lies every time it is interacted with. Imagine the additional data usage and storage and energy that it takes to go through all of those processes rather than simplified processes. And so I think that that's one of the ways that we can think about the conservation of energy here. And that kind of law of thermodynamics makes total sense in this context. And if DeepSeek and whatever other iterations of that there are going to be in the future are able to take advantage of that problem, that alone would be monumental. But then we have the other thing of the decentralization that we just discussed. So if we get to the point where, let me back up actually for a second. So throughout the age of radio and then television and then newspapers, or radio, and I guess newspapers came first, newspapers, radio, television, the internet, and now social media and now AI. We can think of those as stages of that same process. In those early stages, it was, we have these centralized sources of information. We're going to distribute these as widely as we can to the public. Some amount of the public is going to buy our newspapers or see our newspapers here or there, and they will consume the central narrative through this, and they'll be on the same page with one another. And then they get the radio, and that same feature is in people's homes. They listen to the music a little bit, and then they get a nice dose of the official story within the central narrative. And they develop an affinity for the characters talking to them through the radio, and they believe what those characters say. Those characters are truth tellers. They can tell them just about anything. War of the Worlds. Think of War of the Worlds. And then you get television, same thing. You have all the old newsmen with all their gravitas and their deep voices. These are the truth tellers. And everybody, did you watch the news? Do you even know what's going on? You don't even watch the news. You don't even know what's going on. And everybody gets on the same page. And then we get cable television and a variety of different forms of entertainment, all of them reinforcing the same stories about what's happening in the world and the same views on our culture. Okay. We get ESPN. If you like sports, you get the central narrative delivered to you via sports. If you like music, we're going to put MTV on. You'll get the central narrative delivered to you from MTV. Oh, look at that. It's Rock the Vote. Oh, here's a video where there's all these sexy women. Here's a video where this hair metal band is hanging out at strip clubs. Doesn't it look cool and glamorous? Part of my childhood was consuming all of that, being like, yes, that looks awesome. I want some of that. Let me get some of that lifestyle. I'm going to play in a band. I'm going to go out to Hollywood, forget about law school. And by the way, I'm pretty glad I forgot about law school. I'm not expressing regret. I'm just saying some of that was a result of that cultural programming that I consumed through these channels. You get programs again. You get the Super Bowl, have these wide cultural television events. You get the Challenger, whatever. Everybody's on the same page throughout this entire time. The internet now connects people, and they can start getting information that disproves the centralized information. So you figure out other ways to control the internet and other ways to distract people. You get really clever with how to distract people. You put financial incentives on certain parts of it, and you get people to go in certain directions. You just send them all off track with a proliferation of pornography. All of a sudden, you can waste all your time on the internet just being entertained by things that help the regime. If they can't get you to consume the official story, well, they'll just degrade you morally 24 hours a day. And it continues on, and then they put it in your pocket with social media, a constant demoralization tool. Then they add AI algorithms to social media to control what it is you see on social media. All right. So you're going to get the official narrative. You're going to get it from your friends and neighbors rather than from the newscasters and the people you used to trust on television who you no longer trust. Your friends and neighbors will consume the official story within the central narrative as you will. And then the algorithms will show you that everybody else agrees with the central narrative, except for a few crazy people or angry people or negative people who are going to lie to you and convince you that another world exists. Those are conspiracy theorists. You should ignore them. And if your friends and neighbors don't form enough of a consensus to get you back in the pen, then AI bots will comment up certain content and provide a negative reaction toward other content. And you'll spend your day arguing with quote unquote people who aren't people. They're just an AI operating against you, trying to hoodwink you, trying to exploit you. And most people have no idea when they're talking to bots. And I think that I have generally a pretty good idea. I have different methods that I use to try to figure it out one way or another. And, you know, people who have watched me on X, formerly Twitter, or on any number of other platforms have kind of seen that process operate. And I think that over time, they're like, okay, there really is something here. I understand what he's doing. But maybe not. And certainly people who just get on the internet for a little while each day and check their social media feeds to see what their friends are doing or saying, or maybe they want, you know, to read a couple of news stories or a couple of ideas. They're not paying attention to the behavior of bot swarms on there. So most people have no idea. And a lot of people now identify with their political views. So if someone tries to refute what they say, they're going to argue with that person. But over this span of time, you had the central narrative just being inflicted upon everybody at the same time to get everybody back on the same page. And they've tried censorship. They've used the bots. They've used the fake news. Now it's the AI. Everybody has to be back on the same page. And the AI was going to be the once and for all, this is what's going to happen. It's going to dominate through the adoption of this technology. It's going to dominate everybody's lives, and it's going to be able to control them through this centralized algorithm, controlled from the top with these certain motivations. But now it's decentralized. And so we've been worried. We've been told to worry over the last 10 or so years. We concern ourselves. We fret about the disappearance of the monoculture. Everything is so fragmented now. We're being atomized. We know an entirely different reality than our friends and neighbors know. Isn't this terrible? We can't relate about these subjects anymore. And we experience this as some sort of loss, which is very strange because our natural state of being is not experiencing the same reality that our friends and neighbors experience. If we didn't have this interconnectivity, and we didn't have the authoritative source speaking at us through all of these different information streams, then we wouldn't be experiencing that reality at all. We would be experiencing our local reality with our real life friends and neighbors. And we would all have different jobs. One of them would work down at the school, and another one would work at the factory. And another one would work at the gas station, and another one would work at the bank, and another one would work at City Hall. And they would all have entirely different knowledge bases, and they would get together. And as long as you could trust those people, and they had some reasonable amount of competence and intelligence, then if they all got together and spent some time having drinks and smoking cigars and telling each other what life was like, or doing something totally wholesome, right? They would just have a picnic in the park. They could tell each other what everything was like, and they would have a good reason to believe one another. And they would have some good insight on what was happening in the community and who was doing good things and who to avoid. Or, hey, this guy has a really interesting project that he's trying to get some support behind. Maybe you should talk to Hal down at the station and see what he thinks about life. And everyone would have a different body of information, and you could trust them or not trust them. And you would have to analyze what you knew logically, and you'd have to make decisions on your own about what to believe and disbelieve. And we are scared of going back to that. Like, we're not going to know what's happening in Malaysia. You don't know what's happening in Malaysia now. When I talk about geopolitics, it's usually to prove the point that all of this is generated by narrative and by acceptance of that narrative, and then the hyperstition process, as Nick Land calls it. The same story is being projected in cyclical fashion around the world to garner your belief. Your belief is expected. Your belief is incentivized. Your disbelief is punished through the party of false decorum and through, finance and media and in your reputation. That's the party of false decorum part. They control your finances eventually and can debank you. They can cut you off from resources and your ability to transact and do commerce. And then ultimately they can use state violence against you. And so they have the exact same weapons to use against you as the regime has when it overthrows countries around the world. And because of the way that we adopt belief through storytelling, and because storytelling has a traditional form and structure, then what they do is tell us stories and continue to traumatize us or provide us with new goals or new lifestyle opportunities, whatever it is, new beliefs through a story structure. And because those beats need to be hit every time a story is told to us for the emotional response to be elicited, for our belief to engage, and for our actions to correspond to that belief, they need to use the same story structure over and over again. So if we can see the story being told, then we know what the story is for. And we say, what do they want me to believe? And then we can interact with the story and understand it all around the world. And we can prove it to ourselves, no matter how many times we need it proven, that the same story is playing out in the world over and over and over again. It's not just that history rhymes, it's that history repeats, because history is being inculcated through this system over and over and over again. So if that thing decentralizes with our individual AIs, it doesn't matter how connected we are to the machine, we are going to be getting the individual version of it, which neutralizes the information problem. That's how it seems to me. I think that this thing might nullify all of it in exactly the way he described in a more technical sense. And then if you need the spiritual, like, how does this work in the human psychology sense? I think that's it. I think that's it. If everybody's knowledge, again, decentralizes, then it might be that I know XYZ about politics and current events and pop culture. And I can go down to my mechanic in the next town over who's totally on board with these various kind of truth or understandings about how the world has operated. And I know, because we share in that understanding, and he's not looking to form consensus with anyone, that when he tells me what's going on with my car, unless I believe him to be a dishonest man who is trying to hoodwink me and exploit me for money, which I already know him not to be, I can say, okay, that guy knows what's going on with my car. And if I ask him for a long explanation, hey, how does this work? Hey, can you show me this? Can you show me that? He'll be like, yeah, sure, it works this way. And I can know he's telling me the truth because I can watch him tell me the truth. It's verifiable in front of me. And, I'm going to have to stake my results on my ability to discern that, but it's the most important thing ever. This is how we used to operate, and we will operate this way again as soon as things individualize this far. And we worry about the atomization and the fragmentation in our social lives and in our society once this occurs. But the point I'm making is it already occurred back then, and that's the period we long for in terms of our ability to relate to other humans. I think that this actually can nullify the big tech problem. And if there is a plan, then there has to be a plan for the tech problem. Because to talk about the train again, right? This whole great reset is barreling down the tracks. That train is barreling down the tracks. The whole great reset, all this stuff being built, all the resources, the energy, the technology, everything that's been put into that, it's in that train barreling down the tracks. It's coming through the canyon. We're riding down the right side, and the tech bros, the scientific materialists, their controlled opposition on the uniparty left, all the other global leftists, because it ultimately is collectivism. It's all collectivism. It doesn't matter if they're techno-fascists. It doesn't matter if they're diehard communists doing all the woke nonsense. Okay. Doesn't matter if they're Weimar. Doesn't matter if they're Nazis. All of the collectivists are on that side. Scientific materialism. They're trying to create the God of the false reality so that they can control everything. And we have the tech bros, the libertarian tech bros over there, who are MAGA friendly and America first friendly. We want America to win. They are mixed into that group, and they're saying, we're your friends. We're your friends, as they ride down on that side. Probably some of them are riding down on our side too. We just don't know it. Which is why, again, doubting the people on the fantasy team. Do you believe that we have experienced our last betrayal? Unless the answer is yes, you should doubt all of these people all the time. We're riding down on the right side. Tech bros are riding down on the left side. We're both trying to rob that train. We're going to take what's there and we're going to guide it forward. Because if we don't, the other side will. We're going to march our way into this tech dystopia, or we aren't. And it's going to be a matter of what people believe and what people choose. That's still the enemy over there. Okay. And that enemy has to be dealt with. And if there is a plan, then there had to be a plan to deal with that enemy. And I am suggesting that at this point, we are seeing the results of that plan. Okay. I am suggesting that this is the sort of way you would expect that thing to fall apart if a plan like this was in place. Okay. At one time, scientific materialism ends up being rejected because everybody understands. Wow. It's really all bullshit, huh? Yeah. It's really all bullshit. It's really just neo-Kabbalah and a bunch of people trying to hoodwink everyone else to be able to exploit them for initially their money, but eventually their labor, their energy, and then they'll become useless eaters. They will be gone. Do you think the tech bros believe that people of a certain stature, a certain intelligence, a certain level of access that falls below what they consider acceptable, which means inside the party of false decorum? Do you think they believe that those people are useless eaters, holding back all of humanity from the future technology can provide for us, the most beautiful utopia anyone's ever seen? Do you think they believe that or not? And I think people would have a real hard time saying that they don't believe it. The scientific worldview, if practiced and thought through, implies a necessity for that. Because those people in a scientific materialist worldview are useless eaters. They can't actually do things for themselves to contribute to society. They are net takers rather than net givers. So that thing must be defeated. And that is one of the ultimate things to defeat. So it would take something monumental on this scale to be successful in doing that. So that's part one of that explanation. Let's think about part two. And to remind about part two, let's visit with Daniel Day-Lewis and Paul Dano in this scene from Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood.
That land has been had. Nothing you can do about it. It's gone. It's had.
If you would just take this lease, Daniel.
Drainage! Drainage, Eli, you boy. Drain dry. I'm so sorry. If you have a milkshake, and I have a milkshake, and I have a straw, there it is. That's a straw, you see. Watch it. And my straw reaches across the room and starts to drink your milkshake. I drink your milkshake. I drink it up.
Don't bully me, Daniel.
Drainage. If I have a straw and my straw reaches across the room and into your milkshake, I drink your milkshake. Okay. So I've been talking about drainage since it occurred to me that there is no way in the world that Elon Musk could be purchasing Twitter for $44 billion, the most powerful information weapon in the history of the world, from billionaires who use it to control the world and control markets and overthrow governments. It's not possible. Therefore, it's not happening. Okay. That's one of the first thoughts I had in the spring of 2022 when Elon was purchasing Twitter. And now by that time, I'd already been talking for a year and a half about executive. What would it be? I like being accurate about this stuff. 16 months, 17 months, who knows? A year? I don't know. About Executive Order 13848. Because it was clear to me that elections were fake and rigged and stolen. And that all the big tech companies were involved. Twitter censored. Amazon had eliminated Parler in January of 2021. And there may have been other things and other hints. I mean, they're tied in to the DOD. Facebook had contributed through CTCL nearly $500 million and had censored. Google had censored. It was obvious that they were all involved in election interference on behalf of foreign regimes because it is a foreign occupying government. It is a global regime. Whether it exists and whether they exist in the United States or not is irrelevant. It's interference on behalf of a foreign adversary. Okay. So that left an entire range of sanctions and seizures open. I never doubted for 1 second that these companies would be forced to pay out for all of that. And when I saw what happened with Elon and Twitter, then I was like, okay, well, what has clearly happened here is that to the extent that Twitter was ever a private company, and it's probably not, well, then it's obviously been seized by the government and been handed over to their number one recipient of Defense Department contracts, according to Kash Patel. That had to be true. And so there's no reason not to export that model more broadly and see whether or not it fits onto other situations. And I've talked about it with TikTok. You can talk about drainage with BlackRock first and foremost. But just the other day, we saw hints about it with the Chinese purchased farmland here in the United States. We know the Chinese have purchased so much farmland, it's going to have to be reseized. Okay, well, if the government seizes their farmland and then distributes it to, let's say, farmers, then they have paid the money to the farmer from whom they purchased that land, probably by driving him into the point where he had to sell. The land is then returned to the government. The farmer already has that money, and then they have the land too. So, or the government keeps the money, or however the arrangement is going to work. But the point is, the foreign entity, the criminal entity, no matter what it is, has its money or its asset pulled away, and then it is used elsewhere. Now, you could have questions about the size of government and the scope of government when it comes to all that stuff, and those questions are worth asking, okay? I understand that there's a size of government problem, and should the government have this authority problem, but, and again, this is a debate worth having, the scale of corruption and criminality and exploitation is so enormous that I don't know how else you solve these problems without demanding that much from authority. So we'll see. But when investments, so in the Twitter investment, we had Al-Walid bin Talal, something like $5 billion in there. That $5 billion stayed in after Twitter switched hands to Elon Musk. How does that happen? Especially when Mohammed bin Salman already cleaned up the Al-Walid bin Talal thing back in like 2017. So there, what I'm saying is there are mechanisms to get rid of that money. Now, at the same time, we got modern monetary theory, just increasing the fiat money supply whenever it is needed to push that money into U.S. interest. The U.S. government needs to fund condoms in Gaza. Well, make all the condom bombs you want. Here's $50 million for condoms, Gazans. And by the way, where else do they fund condom programs? The inner city in America. What are they trying to do? Eliminate the black and brown population, quote unquote. Okay. So they're going to sexualize the population. Then they're going to give them condoms because there are pregnancy problems. And they're going to say, well, we put all this money toward condoms. It didn't work. So yes, we're giving tons and tons of abortions, but that's because we sexualized this shit out of this population. And the condom thing, well, it didn't work. And it didn't work because we skimmed off all the money. We just laundered all that money and there were no condoms. But yeah. So who's doing the sexualization program and the cultural change program and then initiating the condom programs? Well, that's the global regime working here in America. Who is doing the same thing to Gazans? That's the global regime in their proxy state right next door. Crazy. I know it's crazy. And so the response then from lunatic Zionists is that the condoms are being used to transport bombs. They blow up the condoms with helium and then they send them over like so many paragliding go-karts. I can't even tell if they're joking or not at this point. It's unbelievable. But the money has to, so the money gets expanded in the money supply with the modern monetary theory. They just increase the money supply through the fiat money, and then they pay out this fiat money to all of their interests to enrich their interests. Again, a huge game of musical chairs that they know is going to end and that they plan to replace with a central bank digital currency, whichever one they select. That money gets laundered out. It gets filtered into these corrupt organizations. And now the regime has enriched itself on the backs of American labor. Once again, American labor is responsible for all that money. We have this huge national debt that'll obviously never be paid off because we're at war with the people we owe the debt to. If you win in the war, it's never going to get paid off. So how do we reduce the money supply, then deflating the value of the dollar? Well, you can take it from all those places. I mean, it's fiat money in the first place. So if you take it from all those places it was laundered to and unlaunder it through crypto or through any of these other various drainage mechanisms, then you're able to reduce the money supply and also hold back this supply of whatever legitimate money can then be used to make people whole who were destroyed through the process that got us there. And so what you're doing then is unwinding the money laundering and unwinding the inflation through this process that I've been calling drainage for a few years now. And we can see how all of that would come back. Now, if I'm right about all that, and that actually works, and that's actually happening in the world, then it's going to need to reach everyone who was involved in those schemes. And it seems really, really hard for it to reach all the most wealthy and powerful people. And the wealthiest and most powerful people right now who control the most stuff and the most parts of our economy, etc., and control us the most. Well, they're these exact same tech bros that are getting their asses handed to them in the DeepSeek thing a week after pledging $1 trillion to Donald Trump. So when the adjustments on their books are made for that investment in Trump and America, and this adjustment is made in the market, in the value of their companies, what is it we're witnessing? And maybe to hammer that home, the last part of this would be, do you think it's possible that all of these people, the smartest, most powerful people in the world, had no idea this was coming? Did Sam Altman and Larry Ellison look a little scared to you in their speeches at the White House a couple of weeks ago? Was it last week? Beginning of last week? Oh, yeah, it was. It's only been 9 days that Trump's been publicly recognized as president once again. They looked a little scared to me. They looked a little nervous to me. And they could have known. This has been a threat the whole time. What would happen if the thing we're spending all this money on and doing all this work on and convincing the public about, what happens if that thing gets let out into the wild for free to everyone in a decentralized fashion where they can all make their own and we could never, ever, ever shut it down? Is that what we're seeing? I think it is what we're seeing. And I think we're watching the drainage aspect as well. And I think that this is how the thing had to go. Bay Theater Dave said a little bit ago, sounds like the kingdom of God. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven, on earth. And yeah, I totally agree with that. And the funny thing is, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a brilliant guy, very much on the same page with us about a lot of this stuff. And, a lot of people have the ultimate fears of AI and that those things are coming. And I said to him, I was like, don't you think there's a chance that the bad thing has already happened? I mean, we've had our entire reality distorted so that we think men are women. Okay. And so that we think that good is evil. And we think that we need to escape to Mars because man-made climate change is going to destroy Earth. There are all these different existential crises. Humans have figured out a way to destroy ourselves, all of ourselves. We're able to usurp God in every aspect of our science. Who does it more than anyone? Technology. What is all the technology based on? Kabbalah mysticism. Okay. So now we're seeing all this tech dystopia rise up around us in its highest possible form. We know that whatever exposure to the technology we're getting has been possessed by the military for years or decades, a century. Who knows how long they've been using AI against us? We heard about weather manipulation from Vietnam, and people don't believe it exists right now because they don't see it out there in the world, or they think they don't. They're told they don't, and they believe it, of course. How long has AI been out there shaping our reality? How much of our news, how much of what we believe about what the world is entirely shaped by this AI that just creates all the time? We can go on these digs, and I'm not trying to destroy anybody's reality here or anything, but you can go on a dig. How do you know that the next facts you're getting facts weren't just generated on the fly for you specifically by AI? The Cybertruck bomber story. Did you ever get to the end of it? Did anyone? No, of course not. At this point, is it possible that an AI could just create more parts of that story if someone ever digs that far? Oh, I wound up on this brand new page and it shot me off on a totally different direction. Yeah, it's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that our realities are created by AI already. Okay. And it doesn't have to be the simulation where we're actually in some iteration of SimCity or something. It doesn't have to be that far. But there can be a false reality layer that is generated by AI that we can clearly observe and interact with because people are creating that reality through hyperstition. And the stories that are forming the beliefs that are forming the actions are created by AI. It's entirely possible that that's already the case. Now, the last thing I'm going to say about this. Over the last 5 years, have we observed people waking up en masse or going to sleep en masse after being awake? I would suggest we see people waking up who were asleep prior to that. And as they go through the process of awakening, they ultimately end up being like, oh, well, okay, yeah, it's obviously God. I thought it wasn't God. I was a scientific materialist. I personally was a very publicly open atheist. And extreme skepticism leads you down a road. You wake up and you're like, oh, yeah. Oh, God, of course. Okay. So more and more people every single day are waking up and understanding that God is real as a product of being overly exposed to the adversary in its highest worldly form. Total moral degradation. Okay. Total rampant systematic dishonesty. Systematic hatred. Okay. The construction and erection of a false God that dominates everything that they believe is omnipresent, omniscient, all powerful, everywhere, all the time. That's what AI is. It sees everything. It hears everything. It knows everything. It not only predicts the future, but it can create it for us. It knows us better than we know ourselves. So that thing in its highest form, to the point where these tech dorks absolutely worship it and believe it's the new God. Sadly, some of my friends believe some of the technology is the new God. That thing in its highest form has created the greatest awakening to God in my lifetime by far, and maybe in many people's lifetimes. And I would suggest maybe eventually we're getting close to ever. Okay. So the adversary has risen in the form of technology. And throughout that time, more people are coming to God. And people are like, well, what if it wins? What if it wins? What do you mean? Winning is more people coming to God. So it can't win. It's not winning. And if parts of the world begin to collapse as a result of this change, and people are still just waking up en masse to God, then the impact of that collapse is going to be minimized as much as possible. No matter how crazy all the 4 to 6% who are lost forever, no matter how crazy those demons go, their competition grows every day. So the idea that this thing being decentralized is somehow supposed to be scary to us because more people are going to believe Chinese propaganda. You know who says that? People who believe hook, line, and sinker, absolutely all of the scientific materialist propaganda. The people who trust the science, okay? So if there is a plan, the plan was certainly to defeat these people. And I would suggest to everybody that that is exactly what is happening, totally according to plan, and that it's going swimmingly.